and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So, in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2018 science fiction movie, The Cloverfield Paradox, as directed by Julius Onah. The movie does actually serve as yet another kind of sort of sequel, come origin story this time round, to the 2008 phenomenal monster movie, Cloverfield, and its follow-up, 2016's 10 Cloverfield Lane. This third entry is kind of tries to provide some of the answers to the questions that we kind of got posed that then left us hanging in the earlier movies, kind of by introducing us to the background behind the Cloverfield incidents and how, potentially that they came about. So, before I actually get started and kind of into the nitty-gritty, I just wanted to issue a warning, as I did with the last two, for this movie and perhaps for the others in the Cloverfield franchise. The first two, at least, are the kind of movies that they really are best appreciated the first time around, when you really don't know what's going on. And kind of given the premise of this movie specifically, it may start to kind of remove some of the intrigue and the suspense of those movies. So, I certainly do not mind if you do switch off now, but please do come back to SciFirst MovieTalk. Please come back, let me know when you've watched them films. I would absolutely, truly love to know what you thought of them. And this one, of course, if you do get round to watching this one, if you haven't already. So, this movie is actually quite interesting, and not really so much for what it is, but moreover, really as to how it was released. So, in a similar way to its predecessor, 2016's 10 Cloverfield Lane, this film was actually adapted from a pre-existing script, something called the God Particle, I believe. And they kind of made it fit into the Cloverfield universe. But rather than kind of have a cinematic release, like the other two movies had, this was actually released directly onto Netflix. Okay? But, in fact, it was actually released pretty much directly after its initial surprise marketing campaign at the 2017 Super Bowl. Fans found that, the movie available to watch immediately. Most people didn't even know that this film was being made. And now here it was, not only advertised for the first time, but available for immediate viewing. A very kind of interesting marketing strategy, I must admit. Not quite sure if it actually quite paid off as it was intended to, though. So, this movie is actually set somewhere in the future, at a time when Earth is running out of energy and is basically on the brink of war, the war to end all wars. An alternative solution is required that can provide an unlimited source of energy for the whole world. Welcome aboard, then, the Cloverfield Space Station, a spacecraft that's orbiting Earth, which has on board an interdisciplinary and international team of scientists undertaking a series of dangerous experiments. Well, hence why they're in space. Colliding atomic particles in order to harness their energy inside what was known as the Shepherd Particle Accelerator. After numerous failed attempts, the team actually finally succeed, but in the process, lose Earth. And that's not to mention a number of weird and, increasingly disturbing events are actually occurring on the ship. The crew then have a race against time, space, and dimensions in order to figure out what went wrong, where Earth has gone, and somehow put everything right. So, this film, it's honestly a mixed bag when all's said and done. It's not all bad. but it's certainly not the best in the Cloverfield franchise. It's not the best Cloverfield movie by far. And it's not quite up to the suspenseful and intriguing standards set by the previous two movies in the series. But it does actually have some great sci-fi concepts, though. And that I do actually find quite interesting in the kind of the grand scheme of the Cloverfield universe. However, where the previous two movies actually kept things very simple, very succinct, and only really teased very small portions of that wider universe, with kind of much of their pull coming from the fact that they did actually keep a lot of their secrets to themselves. This movie, it tries too hard to give us everything in one go. And as such, it does kind of come across as being somewhat difficult to follow and kind of muddled in its core concepts. It attempts to give us the rationale for the incidents experienced in the earlier movies, which indeed it does, absolutely. Just not in the most easy to digest way that it could have done. So, I mean, this movie being set in space, and it has a very different feel than its predecessors. Gone is kind of that personal perspective that we get from the characters. Indeed, instead it's kind of replaced with a more generic big space blockbusting film feel. And instead of doing things on its own terms, kind of plays very much to other films we've already seen in the genre. Thus kind of losing, some of the originality and the appeal of the Cloverfield series in the process. It does try to be very much like 1997's Event Horizon, in parts, but never really succeeding to anywhere near the same level of dark horror that film has. With the ship, in this film almost seemingly coming alive, at least looking to make conscious decisions, which, with kind of no hint as to why this actually might be the case. I get the alternative dimensions. I get the crossover of time and how things can get very mixed as two dimensions collide. But this is the first time we have actually heard of a consciousness in space and time itself acting in opposition to our protagonists, which kind of seemed almost like it was added just to kind of make things seem perhaps more interesting than they could have been perceived. We also have an idle hands moment in the movie, which again, just simply isn't explained. But it doesn't have the same kind of intrigue that wants you to know why it's very odd, very odd. Overall, as a result, it does get quite complicated at times, but I did ultimately find the film entertaining enough. It wasn't quite the quality I wanted for the franchise, but I think at its heart, it offered some intriguing and interesting moments and concept of its own. It does kind of switch between events in the space station and events on Earth, which do actually make for some very kind of nice links to the events which did then unfold in the previous movies, which was a nice touch. It, however, didn't really develop its characters. They were all a bit flat and a bit generic in the main. One of them, Gordon Mundy, as played by Chris O'Dowd, was really, really miscast in my opinion. Personally, I do love his style of comedy, especially in the UK TV series, The It Crowd. Simply excellent. That is a fantastic series. But in this film, his comedy seemed at loggerheads with the tone of the movie, that tone it was trying to portray to the viewer. I felt it should have had kind of a more of a serious approach overall, and his comedy felt jarred against that. Almost inappropriate for some of the moments in hand at times. Now, he wasn't awful in the movie, don't get me wrong, just misplaced. In contrast, the movie's heroine, however, Ava Hamilton, as played by, and please do forgive me, Mbatha-Raw was fairly decent all told, and provided us with the film's only real emotional journey. You never felt 100% invested, but the character did raise some interesting questions against what would you do if you found yourself with a chance to live a life you thought you had long since lost. Effect-wise, the film is fairly decent, given the adventurous nature of setting the movie in space. Some of the outside shots of the space station are actually quite impressive. They're not that bad. Some of the more close-up shots, kind of a bit telling at times, but overall, it doesn't detract too much from the story, so that's not too bad. Which, to be fair to the movie, the story is actually quite well paced, and again offers some interesting elements. If perhaps, like I've said, they are a bit muddled. So, overall, as a sequel, it's pretty subpar. Given the previous movies in the series, it really is. As a sci-fi movie in its own right, it's not too bad. It's watchable, at least, and I think, for the most part, it will entertain. I enjoyed the sci-fi elements of the movie, for the most part, like I've said, and the overall story is quite intriguing in its own right, and very relevant, of course, in today's world, drawing on, of course, our fear and our need for what seems like a never-ending thirst for more and more energy. And, of course, our fears of how fast science can sometimes push boundaries without really knowing all of the effects that some of the experiments and actions they may have. It is definitely worth a watch if you've enjoyed the previous two movies. Don't expect it to be like them, though. But at least if you want to find out more about the origins of the Cloverfield events that transpired in those movies, then yes, this is definitely a movie that you want to see. It doesn't offer the same level of captivation or uniqueness that we got with those movies. It just doesn't have their style or pizzazz at all. But it's not a total turkey. Or a total waste of time either. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk. We would definitely love to have you back. But yes, thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.